Welcome to Pitch Lab. Today in this video, we're going to talk about 5 tips to create a sales culture of accountability. Here they are real quick. Tip number 1, you need a sales playbook. Tip number 2, do you have the right organizational structure? Tip number 3, are you running one-on-ones with every single salesperson on your team? Number 4, do you have the right KPIs in place? Are you measuring the right metrics? And number 5, are you hiring the right salespeople? Are you hiring for drive? Let's jump in. If you're a sales leader, you are a CEO or a founder, this video is for you. Let's get it. So Zach, we used to work together, man. We used to work together. It was a fast-growing company, opening up markets all over the place. You were the head of sales. I was a sales consultant with Pitch Lab. And we had a bunch of challenges really trying to scale, trying to get markets stood up quickly. First thing I want to talk about is creating a sales culture of accountability. I mean, this is no joke. When you got all your salespeople on a sales floor, it's easy to just, you stand over their shoulder, you listen into their calls. You could create accountability. Are you here? Are you making calls? Or you're not? But a distributed team, whether it's remote or they're out in a market by themselves, that's a whole different ball of wax. So what I want to talk about is how to create a sales culture of accountability. Here's some best practices I have. You ready to jump in?
Let's dive in.
All right. So the first thing is when you're creating a culture of accountability, what I like to say is, and I know you're a baseball guy, so let's use baseball. In the game of baseball, like, how many strikes until you're out?
3.
And then how many outs until there's a change?
Yeah, 3 outs.
And how many innings are there?
9.
Yeah, and everybody knows this. So as a coach and as an ump, it's easy. It's easy. Like, there's rules of the game. The game, everybody knows the rules. So creating accountability is easy, right? It's not like you're a batter and you're like, whatever, man, give me one more pitch. It's 4 strikes for me. And the first thing I see is when there's no playbook, when there's no rules of engagement, when there's no rules of the game that these salespeople are coming into, how the hell do you create accountability?
Yeah. Well, I think the big thing about the playbook and being in such a fast-paced environment is you really have to talk across the board with your salespeople. And in our specific role of what we were doing, right, we were trying to build out, what does the playbook look like for us, and being a smaller company and really trying to figure that out, really had to reach out to all of our salespeople and say, hey, what works for you, right? And then reaching out to somebody else, what works for you? And then people that are in a leadership role, basically taking their information and what we know that does work and kind of applying it all across the board. There's a lot of checks and balances and a lot of the aspects of like, is this going to work? Well, we don't know, but this has shown to work. So let's put it into a playbook. And then right to your point, we know that there's 3 outs. We know that there's going to be 3 strikes, right? 4 balls is a walk. But on our end, we don't know that. And so it's like taking everything that you would learn from our top salespeople or people that are in management and then applying it into a playbook and then sticking by that, right? Creating that accountability of saying, hey, this is what we've been doing. This does work, right? Let's focus on this and let's continue to push it out to the team so that we can see success because we know that it does work with 60, 65% of the people over here.
Awesome, man. Awesome. All right, let's do number 2, org structure. The big thing here is if you want a culture of accountability, you got to have the right sales org structure. And in some companies I've worked with Pitch Lab, you come in, it's like 1 manager and like 47 salespeople. Like, that's it. Well, he's pretty helpful and she's a mentor and but the org structure is like one to many.
Yep.
So what I'm seeing is then the manager gets everybody into the conference room, whether you're doing the job right or not, everybody's going to get yelled at. And it's like, my son's in like 3rd grade and he hates it when the teacher yells at everybody blanket.
Right.
But when it's one manager to like umpteen salespeople, there's no other way except to get everybody in and ream everybody. And I hate it. So talk about when you're trying to put in the right organizational structure, when you're thinking about that middle layer of management, what are some things to think about to create more accountability with that org structure?
Yeah. So obviously, within the company that we took over as the head of sales, the company that I took over as the head of sales, like there was no organizational structure. And I think back to just past companies I had been with, right? There was always, a director and some kind of manager below, and then myself. So I always had somebody to go to who was in my corner, but at the same time, who was giving me positive or negative feedback to kind of help me along the way. And really, like we needed that. That was something where on our end, okay, there needed to be that middle manager there, one from the accountability piece that we just spoke about, but also being able to just help them and coach them along the way. So the important aspect was trying to find these people that we really, okay, their management style, what did they really look for? But also one of the biggest things that I kept in my head was, some of the best management people are not always the best salespeople. And I'm not saying people that I had in that management structure weren't great salespeople. It's just a matter of how are they interacting and then the relationships that they build. Because the biggest thing about making sure for me that I've come to find and really that I've tried to do myself is building that relationship and that trust with your people. And if you can find managers that are able to do that with the people that are below them, you're going to see a lot of success from it, because as they're building that trust and that relationship, they're going to want to work harder for you. And so for me, having that middle management was exactly the next step as we were trying to build out this company.
Absolutely. And the last two takeaways, you said that perfect. And you're even segueing into number 3, which is one-on-ones. But the last piece I want to talk about is when you're thinking about the org structure of a head of sales, maybe some regional managers or directors, and then the salespeople. Here is your rule. Here is your takeaway. If you're a founder trying to create accountability, I don't want more than one manager responsible for 8 salespeople tops. That is your maximum number, because after that, things start to break. And we'll talk about that at the next point. The other piece is, I do not believe in that player coach role where you're a manager and here's 8 direct reports. I've seen that work temporarily. I've seen that work as a stopgap. I do not like that as an organizational structure. You do not want your manager who's in charge of salespeople to also have a budget, also have a sales quota. There's too much conflict of interest. And ultimately, at the end of the day, 10 out of 10 times that manager starts getting burned out and saying, hey, I'm doing a bunch of stuff. I'm doing none of it well. So there's your 2 takeaways there. Let's move on to the next one. You were kind of sliding into this. The reason why we say 8 salespeople tops to 1 manager is so you can do this. Tell me about the power of one-on-ones that you saw to not only create accountability, but like you were talking about, to build those relationships.
Yeah. So within one-on-ones, right? And I think we get a lot of one-on-ones incorrect across the business world, right? A lot of it is it's the manager coming in and basically leading it and taking on everything there is to do about the one-on-one, right? The salesperson that comes in is completely a lot of times thrown off and they don't know exactly what's going on. Where with one-on-ones and the way that we implemented it across as a structure, right? It's 30 minutes, no more, no less, right? First 10 minutes is for the salesperson to really come in because it's their one-on-one. This is an opportunity for them to talk about what's going on in their life, personal, right? How are the kids doing? Whatever. The second aspect of it is going to be for you to really just give that opportunity back and say, hey, this is what we're doing based off this, based off that. And then on the last 30 minutes, right, it's just kind of wrapping up and bringing everything whole together. One-on-ones were super effective for us because we were remote all across the US, right? So managers were doing regions all around. And with that, you're really able to build, as I was saying before, the relationship and the trust with your people. And if you're having that one-on-one cadence, right, it's something that has to happen. This isn't something where it's like, oh, we had a one-on-one this week. 2 weeks from now, we're not going to do a one-on-one, or hey, next week I got to move it, right? The biggest thing is just having that communication no matter what, even if you have to hop on a phone, even if it's not over the web, right? Or not over a webcam. Like the biggest aspect of it is that you are having it and you are having these conversations. I mentioned the relationship and trust aspect, like building a relationship with somebody where you know who their family members are, what they got going on in their life. It's just going to carry over to the work side where they're going to want to work for you. So for the one-on-ones for us, it was super, super important. And it was something that we continue to do day in and day out.
Awesome. Awesome. And developing those relationships, developing the trust. And I love what you said about the first 10 minutes, even if it's the first half of that 30 minutes, it's for the salesperson. It's not for the manager to talk at them, right? It's for the salesperson. Let's go though. Now it is the second half of the one-on-one. I want to talk a little bit about KPIs, metrics. I want to talk about, you obviously have to have a CRM. You have to have some type of metrics. And you don't need to do every single one, but what were some of the biggest metrics that you would recommend that managers trying to create accountability look at week over week in those one-on-ones regarding your salespeople's pipelines?
Yeah. So obviously being in a remote environment, it's a little different, right? Like I can't see who they're calling on a day-to-day basis, right? So you can't really see that effort aspect. And one of the biggest things is if you're hiring salespeople, especially if you've got SDRs that are being promoted into an AM role, right, or an account manager role, like to me, results oriented. It's a based aspect of like, okay, are you closing? I don't care what you're doing because at that point you've already hired them to do their job. You already trust them. They've already been promoted into that role. So the biggest thing for me is, okay, how much revenue are you bringing in? And then what does that look like? And then going back on the one-on-ones and being able to coach through that, right? What are the issues they are having? Are they having issues with the cold calling? So for me on KPIs, it really is an aspect of the results-oriented base. But then, right, depending on your business and kind of what you're looking at, you can take extra KPIs along the way and really focus around that, whether it is a results oriented base or as it is a project base. Like there's different aspects of it, but for me, it's the results.
Love it. That's so smart. And if a salesperson, if a remote salesperson, distributed salesperson is hitting their numbers, there's no reason to dig deeper. However, if they're not, I'll give you a couple takeaways. So the first one you said is win rate, right? That's the win rate. That's the revenue. That's the first KPI you always need to look at versus budget. That's obvious. Everybody could see that. The next one though, that I think is really interesting is as you have the stages of the sales process and just generically, right? Let's say it's discovery, pitch, proposal, contract, and closed won. What I like to look at is when you look at all the opportunities in the pipeline, how many of them are advancing from stage to stage, week over week, right? If that's only 5% of your total opportunities are advancing in the stage, that's a problem. If your opportunities are advancing week over week, great metric to look at. And the last one that I think win rate is the number one thing to look at, but the last one is, especially when a salesperson is told to fill their own funnel and you have to find your own opportunities, you have to have at least 3x leads, right? 3x opportunities into what that close rate should be. So say your close rate, your average close rate should be 30%, which is good, right? If everything's referrals, it could be higher. If your leads are trash, it could be lower. But if that's a 30% win rate you're looking for, you got to have at least 3 times that. So if that salesperson isn't putting the right opportunities in there, they don't have enough leads, and they're not constantly filling that, that's the next metric. So metric number 1, do they have enough leads? Do they have enough activity? Do they have enough opportunities? Number 2, what percentage of their opportunities are advancing week over week from different stages? And then number 3, like you said, is that win rate. And I love what you said, right? If they're hitting their numbers, they're doing their thing, there's no reason to go real deep.
Yep. And I think it's important about what you were saying, right? That 3x, to a point where we're watching them on their win rate. But when you're going through those individual coachings and you're having those conversations about their opportunities and you're really trying to understand exactly where they are in the sales process, if they're not making 100 calls, right? This has been said multiple times, 100 calls, 10 people are going to answer, 1 person's going to give you the business. So you've got to continue to make those calls. And it's got to be sometimes even more than that to make sure that you're getting enough people on the phone to at least hit your quota overall.
Awesome. And I know the last piece is this kind of really isn't about accountability, but the other thing, and we'll talk about this in our next video, Zach, but the other thing is the more you can hire salespeople for drive, the more you can hire salespeople that are intrinsically motivated and just have that need to win, the less accountability and the less you need to put them under a microscope. So that's your last takeaway. Thanks for joining us.